Hey, baby.
Well, I'm getting real tired of being right all the time. Now before we go any further, spoilers for Watchmen Episode 7 are ahead. In one of our past videos, I theorized that... I have one last theory. Is Cal Dr. Manhattan? And I was right. We're going to go over all the hints you missed and the other Watchmen Easter eggs for this episode here on ScreenCrush. Now we open with the documentary that informs new viewers about Dr. Manhattan. This serves as both an origin story and a way to let us see firsthand how Manhattan has affected the world. There are ads for the watches and cars powered by the lithium he creates, and that the 7th Cavalry are now using to build their teleporter. In the comics, Dr. Manhattan was symbolic of the atomic bomb, and he introduced a new wave of products into the world, just like atomic energy. Notice the watches glow Manhattan blue. And this car, the Ford Andromeda, named after the galaxy, has his symbol on its front license plate. The image of Dr. Manhattan as a giant walking through Vietnam is taken straight from the comic. On that same page, he says, "Often they ask to surrender to me personally, their terror of me balanced by an almost religious awe." Now that sentence gives the episode its title and explains the festivities on VVN Day, that's Victory in Vietnam. We see Vietnamese people celebrating Dr. Manhattan like a god, not a conqueror. In fact, this headline implies that a city-state in Rome, the Vatican, is in disrepair. Now this tells me that after Manhattan's arrival, people became less interested in conventional religion. This headline, The Right Stuff, is a play on the book and film about the early days of the space program, and the image of Dr. Manhattan at the moon landing is from the Watchmen movie. This standee of Manhattan was drawn by Watchmen co-creator Dave Gibbons. Angela cycles through a few VHS tapes, including Trunky and Tusky, 2 movies about cartoon elephants. In a previous video, I explained that elephants are important in Vietnamese culture and are revered by both royalty and peasants. The Vietnamese folk hero, Lady True, rode a white elephant into battle. Lady True in Watchmen named herself after this woman. There's also Fog Dancing, a fictional movie that's directed by David frickin' Cronenberg. Fog Dancing was the novel seen in episode 4. It was written by Max Shea, who unknowingly helped design Vite's squid monster. There's also Silk Swingers, presumably about Laurie's mother, the Silk Spectre. Monsters from Outer Space is the way a stagehand described Dr. Manhattan in Book 3 of The Watchmen. And finally, Sister Night. The PDpedia, HBO's online companion to the show, says this movie was one of several mask-sploitation films released in the 1970s. Now this is an alternate universe spin on blaxploitation films like Shaft and Foxy Brown. In particular, these were responding to the fact that there were no black superheroes. I mean, at least as far as everybody knew. This movie's tagline, "None with a motherfucking gun," is also a track on the soundtrack. And, like Laurie guessed, Sister Night was tied to Angela's original trauma.
So, did nuns murder your parents?
In the street, there's a marionette puppet show showing Dr. Manhattan's conquest of Vietnam that we just saw in this footage. The song playing, Living in America, was from the Rocky IV soundtrack. And in that movie, a larger-than-life hero overcomes hostility to heal the wounds of the Cold War, much like Adrian Veidt, or you could say, like Dr. Manhattan. So the marionette puppets goes back to Dr. Manhattan's view of time that I talked about in an earlier video. He sees all of time as happening at once, like a round, flat circle. This is also similar to how Angela relives all her memories at once in this episode. In issue 9 of The Watchmen, Laurie asks John if he's a puppet following a script, and he replies, "We're all puppets, Laurie. I'm just a puppet who can see the strings." Now this gets into the episode's main theme of godhood and manipulation. John took away his own ability to see the strings when he became Cal. Laurie drops through a trap door like a puppet being lowered onto a stage, and it turns out that she was manipulated to come to Tulsa, probably as bait for John. He finds out that Keen's plan is to fully cut his puppet strings and become the puppeteer by becoming Dr. Manhattan.
And it is extremely difficult to be a white man in America right now. I might try being a blue one.
Also, Lady True and Will have been manipulating Angela, while Will directly controls minds with this flashy thing. At one point, there's a brilliant fade from Angela's eyes to the stained glass windows of a church's ceiling. Now this mirrors the later shot of her staring at Dr. Manhattan, literally with God in her eyes. Adrian Veidt's trial is essentially puppets rebelling against the puppeteers, and also the squid monster submitted into evidence is a drawing straight from the comic book. The music playing at the trial is Mozart's Requiem in D minor. Now this also played when Wade entered the 7th Cavalry headquarters. In both scenes, the lyrics translate to, "Mournful that day, when from the ashes shall rise the guilty man to be judged." In both cases, I think the guilty man means Adrian Veidt. There's also a Jolly Roger behind the judge. This symbol was also in a previous episode. It's there to symbolize the comic within a comic, The Black Freighter. That's about a sailor who builds a raft of dead people, but becomes a murderer, condemned to sail on the Black Freighter of Death. The story is a symbol for Adrian Veidt, who murdered 3 million people, but with the best of intentions. The moment when he's condemned, was very similar to Dr. Manhattan being ambushed by reporters when he was scheduled to be on a talk show. Afterwards, he pieces out to Mars, just like Veidt is probably about to leave Europa for Earth. Now, I think he's going to leave the moon because in this episode, Lady True says,
"And at 30, I designed and launched the first microfusion spacecraft."
So I think she does rescue Veidt with this technology, and the object that crashes on the Clark's farm was his ship. And by the way, judging by young John's face in this photo, I think Phillips and Crookshanks are definitely male and female recreations of John Osterman. Now, someone hit me up on Twitter and asked if I thought this trial was staged by Veidt to punish himself. I don't think that, but I do think it's a cool theory. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Moving on, Angela's nostalgia treatment is administered with a yellow tube. Yellow is an important color in the original Watchmen and in the series. It symbolizes both caution and comedy. In this case, Lady True is essentially playing a twisted prank by hooking Angela up to an elephant. So let's talk about that elephant. Is Lady True giving it all of the memories? Does it have consciousness? Is it some play on an elephant never forgets? Tell me your best elephant theories, you guessed it, down in the comments.
Any other day that might seem strange.
So now let's talk about nostalgia. On The Watchmen, it was the name of Adrian Veidt's cosmetics line, meant to evoke a feeling of good days gone by. But the word doesn't always have a happy connotation, right, Don?
In Greek, nostalgia literally means the pain from an old wound.
In her dedication speech for the Millennium Clock, Lady True says that she invented the drug to help people learn from their worst memories, but instead they became obsessed with their trauma. And this is basically every hero on the show. Lady True tries to ask Angela questions, and her sarcastic answers
Was my 10th birthday party. My mom and dad gave me a pony.
Are a lot like Rorschach's deadpan answers to his psychiatrist in Watchmen issue 6. Now, True has several revelations for Angela in this episode. The first is that her daughter is actually a clone of her mother. This concept was hinted at in episode 5.
Genetic trauma. Basically, if something really bad happens to your parents, it gets locked into their DNA.
This idea that we physically pass on trauma is an analog to how we actually pass on trauma to the next generations. Slavery leads to citizenship, and that leads to hate crimes, and that leads to civil rights, all the way up through the 7th Cavalry and the Tulsa Police. Beyond is studying the adaptive function of empathy. Now basically, this means learning to understand how other people feel. It's also fitting research because Beyond, being a clone with the memories of someone else, is herself an experiment in empathy. Nostalgia does this for people on a small scale, but my theory is that the Millennium Clock will do this on a worldwide scale and will share the traumas of several people all at once. For instance, when Angela was young, she named one of the people responsible for killing her parents. A bag was placed over this guy's head and he was led off to die. This person saw himself as an oppressed minority fighting for justice. Now, this is meant to parallel Will Reeves, having a bag placed over his head before he was lynched by the police. Speaking of the Millennium Clock, we hear a little bit of True's dedication speech.
Countless generations will gaze upon our mighty work, and without despair.
Petey confused this with a direct quote from Shelley's poem Ozymandias.
Look on my works, ye mighty in despair.
Whereas True's actual speech is a lot more optimistic. Ozymandias is, of course, the Egyptian pharaoh who inspired Adrian Veidt's superhero identity. When Angela meets her grandmother, they go to Burgers and Borscht. This is a chain of Russian-American cuisine that we see in the closing pages of The Watchmen. Now, it's meant to symbolize that the Cold War is over and these cultures have begun to mix. She also says,
Lots of opportunity in a brand new state.
This mirrors Oklahoma, which became a state in 1907. In the musical Oklahoma, which we see in episode 1, the finale takes place as the company is celebrating statehood and the opportunities of living in America. It's also likely that Will's parents or grandparents moved to Oklahoma for these same opportunities. And Looking Glass is alive. He managed to overcome the cavalry thugs that stormed his place, the reverse fate of Hollis Mason in The Watchmen. Also, it's interesting that he has a copy of the New Frontiersman. Now, this is the extreme right newspaper that believes the squid monster attack was a lie. Wade, as we know, had no doubts about the squid monster attack being real. Judd's wife is riding a white horse, a symbol that's been addressed in almost every episode of Watchmen, shouting back to the band playing MSG in the original comic.
Pale horse.
When Laurie wakes up in Cyclops' headquarters, she begs Keen not to monologue.
He starts monologuing.
In the comic, Veidt points out that he's not some
public serial villain.
But Keen is exactly that. He has a trapdoor, an evil plan, and he monologues. My guess is that the 7th Cavalry's plan goes horribly wrong, and somehow Will and True become the real villains of the series. If you have a theory, let me know in the comments. Oh, and Cyclops' symbol now has a Dr. Manhattan ring around it, something I didn't pick up in episode 5. When Angela wakes up Cal, he's reading For Whom the Bell Tolls. It's about an American soldier fighting in the Spanish Civil War against Franco's fascist government. This rise of fascism is mirrored in The Watchmen as the 7th Cavalry are trying to become gods. But also, the episode's title is taken from this John Donne quote: "No man is an island unto himself. Every man is a piece of the continent, and therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." Basically, the book is about recognizing the humanity in others. You know, empathy. Just like Dr. Manhattan is learning to empathize with humanity by becoming Cal. So let's talk about that big reveal and all the foreshadowing that led up to it.
He also says that Dr. Manhattan can pretend to be human.
No, he can't.
First of all, we never see how Angela survived the White Night. So we can guess Cal saved her. Now this is just a theory, but what if Judd was there wearing a Rorschach mask and he saw that Cal was Dr. Manhattan? He even says,
I reckon there's somebody up there looking out for you.
which could be a reference to the godlike Dr. Manhattan. Judd would have told all this information to Keen, who would have access to all sorts of research about Manhattan and lithium that could reveal ways to trap and duplicate his powers. Angela tells him to come out of the tunnel. Now this is a callback to something Wade said in episode 5.
Because we are all in a tunnel, and every tunnel ends.
Now he's talking about overcoming trauma, but also for the way humans perceive and move through time. Like I said before, Dr. Manhattan views all of time as happening at once, a perfect flat circle, like his symbol or like the face of a clock. By living in the tunnel, he's experiencing time in a human, linear manner. Now his name, Cal, is also a clue. In Superman, his Kryptonian name is Kal-El. In other words, that's the name he would have if he was equal to everyone else, like Cal is equal to other humans. This is also similar to the plot of Superman 2 when the Man of Steel gives up his powers to live with Lois Lane. There's also a lot of comparisons to Dr. Manhattan and Superman in the comics. When he was first revealed to the world, the press said the Superman is real and he's American. Also, when we first meet John, the symbol on the government research facility is made to resemble Superman's S.
It's not an S.
Whatever. Lori's dildo is called Excalibur, which the good people on Reddit figured out means Ex-Cal-A-Bar, because John is Lori's ex-boyfriend. She even compares John to Cal.
He sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, he's no Cal.
Manhattan Blue often appears around their house, like in Topher's room or this basketball rim.
I lied.
And you hate lying.
Cal is also very clinical with how he teaches the kids about death and God.
Before Uncle Joe was born, he was nowhere. Didn't exist. Then he died. Now he's nowhere.
In the Peteypedia, you can read the doctor's report after Cal's accident. It says that he received a head injury in 2009 and that he worked for Pyramid Global Construction. Now I think this is odd because Veidt owned a company called Pyramid Shipping in the comics. So what if Veidt helped John become immortal in 2009 and in exchange, John sent him to live like a king on the moon Europa?
In the beginning, I thought it was a paradise.
After the reveal, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's awesome cover of Bowie's Life on Mars begins. I've mentioned before that every ending of a Watchmen episode mirrors the beginning. This one begins and ends with the reveal that John journeyed to America to start a new life. Here's one last theory for the comments. Who is Lady True's dad? She says,
Your dad's here too?
He will be.
so is her dad the elephant? Or is he the comedian? Or, I think, is he Dr. Manhattan? Let me know your theories down in the comments. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and ring that bell. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.